Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for session 2 of the practical applications of On the Money. We've got Steve Oberholzer with us, and we're going to take a moment to recap a little bit about where we're up to in the series. So last week we looked at part 1, which was finding out what we own and what we owe. And today we're going to be talking a little bit more about the next step. And this ties in with the sermon that Pastor Johan preached, which you can catch. If you haven't watched it already, make sure that you get that, because that's got the biblical foundation for that. But Steve, take us through a little bit about what have we discussed so far and where are we going today?
Thanks, Debbie. So last week we had a look at figuring out exactly where you are at right now from a financial point of view. We called it financial legacy, and at this point you'll have some form of a financial legacy, and the aim is that in time to come you're going to build more of a financial legacy. And so we looked last week at analyzing what you own and what you can then sell for cash, and also having a look at what you owe, and the net of those two things together are effectively what your current financial legacy is.
And as believers, as people who want the best for our lives and for our future, we want to create a financial legacy that is going to be a blessing to the next generation. It might be our physical children, it might be a legacy of goodness in our churches, but we want to make a difference in the world. And so it's so important that we really understand our assets, what we own, and also what we owe, so that we can create that financial legacy. But that doesn't happen in a day. It's something that takes a lifetime for most people to actually create that. And it's a lot of individual spending decisions. So we're going to be talking a little bit about a spending plan. So tell us, what is a spending plan and how does it work?
Well, like anything in life, if you're going to achieve something, you need to have a plan. And so a spending plan is literally planning how you're going to spend the money that you do have. And to do that, you need to obviously have a good idea of A, what you earn and what you have available to spend, and B, what are the items that you need to spend on, and what are those items that you probably don't need to spend on, need to make those kind of choices so that you have available money to be able to create what we're working towards as a financial legacy.
I know when Johan and I did our first money course, we were newly married, and we were excited. We wanted to do things God's way, and this is exactly where we got stuck, because it always starts off with your salary. And at that stage, neither of us were earning a salary. He was doing sales, commission only, and I was working in a therapy practice. So my salary was no more. I had months where there was lots of income, and other months where literally I had zero income. And so we actually never even filled it in. I remember we got the whole workbook and everything, and we never filled it in. And for a while it was okay, and then we had children, and children get quite expensive, and then our children got quite sick, and we had something which the financial institutions love to give you, and that's a credit card. And we thought, fantastic, we'll just use the credit that we've got to pay for the expenses, and we got into some serious financial difficulty. And I'll never forget the evening when we sat down and we actually did the exercise that we talked about last week, where we wrote down what do we own and what do we owe. And I can remember with tears in my eyes, the two of us looked at each other and we said, we actually cannot continue living here and living the way that we've been living. We're going to have to make some radical lifestyle changes. And for us, we went to the church first. We had an amazing group of people around us who prayed with us and gave us really good financial assistance and help in helping us redesign how we had been managing our money. I'm pleased to say that nobody actually gave us money. It's quite interesting to say that. They gave us advice that helped us restructure. And because of that, we've been able to give money to others. And I think that's a really amazing financial legacy. So the key principle that we learned is that you cannot spend what you don't have.
Yep.
And so we actually, at some stages, did it month by month. The income line was different every month. And sometimes we even did it week by week, where we said, this is what we've got in now. What are we going to spend this on? So that we were able to manage that. And as soon as you start to apply that spending plan to your living, it changes the way that you do everything.
Absolutely. And interestingly, if money is tight, it's even more important to budget. And even if money is uncertain, and I know there are many of us who are going through uncertain times right now, perhaps had a salary cut or even a loss of a salary. And even in those times, it's really important to budget and to think and to plan with whatever you do have, because if you do that, you've got a much better chance of managing than if you don't.
So talk us through, how do we fill this in? Steve, you've given us some practical examples of how we can do this.
I think the first thing I'd like to say is there's two really key principles, biblical and practical, that we need to apply and think about when we do this. And the first is that it's really vital that each of us take stock of our lives and that we learn to live within our means. That's a really, really key principle. And the moment we're not doing that, that's when the budget is really going to hurt. And that's when you're really going to battle. So that's the first key principle. The second key principle is that we need to plan our lives so that we can live with a little margin. And Pastor Jay spoke about that in his message. That we have margin available to be able to manage on days when things don't go so well, but also to be able to bless others as the need and the time comes. And God will show us when those times are. But if we plan to live with a bit of margin in our budget, that will enable us to be able to do those things. So those are the first two key principles.
So talk us through the categories and how would you recommend we go about putting together a spending plan?
All right, so the first part is to look at the income that you earn, and especially if as a family, it's good to do it as a family budget if you have perhaps more than one income. And so the first section that's outlined on the sheet that you have in front of you is where you put in the income that you earn. That's after deductions, so it's the actual cash that you have available to be able to spend on a monthly basis. Then going through the rest of the sheet, it outlines various ways that you have an ability to spend, lots and lots of ways, unfortunately. And you need to just go through each one of them one at a time, evaluating what those items are. Some of them are things you're going to have to spend, such as if you have a bond on your home, or if you have electricity to pay. So certain are reasonably fixed costs. Others are discretionary costs, expenses that you can choose to spend on or not spend on, and that's ultimately where you need to make decisions to be able to work with it within your budget. I think one of the really amazing rules of thumb that I learned in terms of budgeting and in terms of evaluating expenses is to look at each expense not just as the once-off expense when you make it, but to take that expense and multiply it out to see what you're spending on that one item in a year. Right, so I'll give you a practical example. So Debbie, if I can ask you, what would you do with 3,500 Rand if you had it today?
Ooh, I could definitely do something with that. We could put that towards a holiday. We could definitely have something that would make a difference for our family. We could do a whole new wardrobe for that. We could do a home upgrade for that. That's a decent chunk of money. Where are you going with this?
Wow, so there's lots you can do with it. So let's have a look. Let's say you have a habit and you buy a Coke or something similar to a Coke every single day. And let's say it's 10 Rand to buy that. And let's say 10 Rand then times 30 days in a month is 300 Rand a month. And if you multiply that out by 12 months in a year, that's 3,600 Rand in a year that you're spending on a Coke.
For something small, something 10 Rand's worth can make such a big impact long term.
Right. So that's the key for me anyway, when I evaluate expenses as to whether I'm going to spend them or if I've got to cut them in half or whatever choices I've got to make. I need to look at those from an annual point of view and then make the decision about those particular expenses as to whether they make sense or don't make sense. So do you have 10 Rand that you spend every day of your life on something that you could perhaps not spend?
I'm sure if we go and have a look at the budget, we can find some things. And I think that's the beauty of having a plan, is you, in a sense, almost find money that you can then allocate to something that is more significant to you.
Exactly. So if we go back to the spreadsheet's made up of a number of different areas. And if you have a look, they go in a certain particular order. They're numbered from 1 onwards. And I want to encourage you that as you fill out the spreadsheet, do them in that order, because those tend to be the items that we need to make decisions on first, key principles, biblical principles. And then the ones that come lower down are the items that we can make decisions on thereafter. And you've always got the ability to go back and relook and redecide on what to do on some of those items.
So I noticed right at the beginning, you've started off with giving and with saving. Now, when we look at the Bible principle, God's word guides us to tithe. Jesus himself said, yes, it's good if you tithe, but don't make tithing the only thing that you do. We need to live out the other areas of our Christian walk. So if Jesus himself believed in tithing and giving a tenth, I believe it's something that is, as Christians, it's something that we want to have as part of our budget. So I'm glad that you've put that first. And then you've also included other giving. So there may be other needs, maybe a project that you want to give towards. And then you brought in savings as the next category. And if I have a look at your spreadsheet as a whole, that's kind of the place where we're wanting to create margin. When you've got those savings and those reserves so that when you need them, they're there.
Exactly. And so if we look from a tithe point of view, so yes, tithing is an important biblical principle. And I understand that not everyone is at a point when they are tithing yet. But what I'd like to encourage you to do is to start somewhere. And over time, as you begin to tithe, and as you begin to be able to tithe more, you'll find you'll be able to work towards what is more of a normal tithing percentage of 10%. I think the saving principle is also true. If you're not saving anything right now, the key principle is to start somewhere.
So even if you were to start with 1%, am I understanding you correctly, we're looking at percentage based. So it's not just, I'm going to put 10 Rand aside. It's actually taking it as a percentage so that you're starting to see your budget as a whole take shape.
Yeah, that's correct. And certainly from a tithe point of view, the tithe we know, biblical, is 10%. And then we also give the additional offerings to be able to put in, which is over and above. And then within savings, there's the ability to save for emergencies or times that you're not sure of, as well as for the future and for retirement. If you have a look also on the spreadsheet, you'll see each section has a guideline of a percentage from and to. And it's not specific because everyone's circumstances are different. And you need to work out for yourself for which is the best circumstance from your point of view.
If I look at our budget over time, it's also changed. When we had young children, a big percentage of our budget was going to diapers, to nappies. And then we went through a stage where there was a lot of expenses for schooling. And now we're in an interesting season where we're looking more at planning for retirement, where we're looking at our kids' education, tertiary education. And so the percentages have changed. For me, it's quite exciting that we now do an allowance for our young men. They're students, but they're still in our home, and we give them an allowance, and they're starting to apply these same budget principles. And in the same way, they're also going to need to put the different categories in place. I think another thing that we realized is that the bigger items can have a bigger impact.
Yeah.
So one of the decisions we made early on is we realized that we were spending quite a lot on travel. And so we made the decision to move closer to school and to work to cut down on our travel costs. So our housing amount went up, but our travel amount came down. And if you're looking at housing, you also need to make the decision of whether you're going to rent or whether you're going to purchase a property. For us, we decided, particularly while the kids were in school, we knew that we were going to be in a particular area for a couple of years while they were in a particular school. And so we decided to purchase a home. And so that money for housing wasn't just an item on the on the plan, but it was also actually building up towards our assets.
And that's very practical. Everyone's circumstances changes all the time. And so that's another point about your spending plan. You need to have one now, but it really is a changeable situation. You're going to chip and change your budget over the years depending on your circumstance. And as things change, you'll need to change your budget.
So talk us through the other categories, Steve.
So the next category relates to debt. And we are going to do a specific session, I think, in week 4 regarding debt. And the importance of trying to pay off your debt as quickly as you can within whatever you can. Because without a doubt, interest that you pay on debt is one of the items that reduces your ability to spend in other areas. And it also reduces your ability to have margin. And debt is so easy in today's world. But besides debt that there is on houses and cars and things like that, credit card debt, store card debt, those kind of unsecured debts are so easily available, and we can so easily spend and not be able to pay those back.
So now when you put the debt into your spending plan, we're putting the monthly amount that we put in here, and the full amount of how much you owe is actually in the ones that we did last week, the know what you own and owe. So the full debt would be listed as a liability, and then the monthly expense will come into your monthly or weekly spending plan.
That's right. And if we look under debt, where it's got credit card and store card, those need to be the amounts that you're going to pay each month on those particular, each debt item that you have. If you're buying groceries, for example, on your credit card, then put those under the grocery section in your budget. But what you need to then do is, if you're behind on your credit card and you've got an additional payment that you're making, put that under the debt part, because that's effectively paying off debt as opposed to paying off a monthly normal expense.
And we learned the hard way to make sure that you pay off a credit card in full every month. We have had the occasion where we had medical expenses that were higher than what we'd expected. We were able to use the credit card to pay that, and then we were able to break it down into the monthly debt management plans, just like the spending plan makes provision for.
Yeah, it's a reality of life that we all face at some point or another, and life happens. There's no question that life happens. And so this is not a prescriptive thing. Sometimes in life you have to make choices. I understand that. But I think the key principle is that if you are not able to pay off your monthly credit card bill on a monthly basis when it's due, then you're in debt that you probably shouldn't be, and you're probably also living beyond your means. I think that's one of the key indicators of living beyond your means, is not being able to pay it off on a monthly basis like that.
So we've got debt, housing, transport costs, and then we've got insurance. Now, do we have to have insurance? Surely as believers we can just say, hey, God's going to look after my stuff. Like he did in the Old Testament, their shoes didn't wear out when they were in the desert. I've heard some Christians say we don't really need insurance.
Well, there's different types of insurance. And if we have a look at life insurance, for example, the key for life insurance is that you really need that if you have dependents. So if you have children who are young perhaps and they're still growing up, if something was to happen to you and your income dried up, then at least there's life insurance cover to be able to help them in those kind of situations. Then there's income protection insurance, which for those who work, that's quite a useful insurance to have. Perhaps not so easy to afford, and maybe not one that you'll have definitely, but one to have if you possibly can. And then, of course, there's short-term insurance on cars and houses and things that we own. And the key there really is to be able to avoid a significant issue in life where, let's say you have an accident, your car's written off. Does that sound a little familiar? And then as a result of that, instead of being left out of pocket in a large way, you have an insurance payout there to cover. So
yeah, we had that exactly last month, in fact. We had a car, it was paid off. We've had it for many years, and we were involved in an accident. It wasn't our fault, but the car was covered. And I know it's so important, if you are going to have a vehicle, to make sure that you are insured, not only to cover your own costs, but also to cover the costs for another person involved in that. And we were able to replace the vehicle with minimal hassle. So there is a space for that kind of contingency plan to make sure that you have what you need.
correct. And to avoid a scenario where you have a massive financial loss, which you then have to try and find a way to be able to cover.
Mm-hmm. Then we've also got medical and health, and I know there's so many options for that in today's society. And then we've got household and personal. Now, I think this is the one that we enjoy the most and the one that gets us the most into trouble.
Exactly.
So for us, what we found, we put together our spending plan. This was the one that was the most difficult to manage. Most of the other ones kind of are a once a month payment. But the day-to-day spending, we're going to be talking some more about that next week, on how to actually keep track of that. And then we've got leisure. And now, do we have to include leisure into our budgets? Surely that seems like a luxury.
It is a luxury, but by the same token, life is here to enjoy. And so I don't have a problem with budgeting for leisure. It's really a matter of what you can afford. And that's ultimately what it all comes down to, is affordability. And to the extent that you're able to and you can budget and include leisure in your life, please do so. Really important.
And there's also many leisure options. I remember when our kids were very young, we had a very small budget for leisure, and we went to one of these places where you've got a nice kids play area, and we bought the cheapest item on the menu, which at that stage was an ice cream, and for us it was a major family outing. So we didn't spend a lot of money, but we got a lot of value for what we had put aside for that.
Yeah, I think in many ways there are ways to enjoy life that don't necessarily cost. And those are some of the decisions that you need to make in conjunction with setting up your budget. And if there are ways in which you can save in that area, that makes it a whole lot easier in other areas.
So as we wrap up today, Steve, what is your recommendation or your encouragement to people as they put together a spending plan?
I think the key is to start. The key is not just to look at it and say, oh, that was a nice idea, and put it down again. Pick it up. Take on the challenge. It's like anything in life. Once you start, it begins to grow on you. And once you start, you learn things. You learn things about yourself, about your spending habits, about where you are and perhaps where you want to be able to create margin, to be able to tithe, to be able to save, and also to be able to spend on things that we need on a day-to-day basis. So for me, the key is to start.
That's great. Thank you so much, Steve. This is really practical and helpful. And you can get these worksheets to fill in your workbook. It's available on the website to download, or you can get one from the church office. And we can also send you an electronic version. It's got all the formulas in it to add it up for you and to calculate the percentages. But as you've said, Steve, start somewhere and ask God to try to guide you step by step as you make your plans. Thank you so much, and I look forward to our next session for next week, where we're going to be talking about how you actually manage your day-to-day spending.
Look forward to it. Thank you.